My name is Fariha Naqvi-Mohamed. I am a video journalist with City News Montreal. I'm an op-ed columnist with the Montreal Gazette, and I'm a blogger and the founder of CanadianMomA.com, which is the #1 diversity blog in the country. I am a passionate ambassador for all things diversity, as well as a PR specialist and a social media maven. The relationship between my identity and this anti-racist project is deeply intertwined. Everything that I have done and professionally has stemmed out of my experiences with racism and discrimination growing up. They fortunately and unfortunately, fortunately for it, but the reality is that the unfortunate instances of physical, verbal, emotional bullying I endured growing up impacted me severely, and in hindsight, contributed to shape me into the woman that I am today. But I have not forgotten that. And so I work actively to combat racism and discrimination in every form possible, whether it's through my storytelling in my news reports for City News Montreal, whether it's weighing in on topics in my op-ed columns in the Montreal Gazette, or whether it's taken to social media on my platforms with my highly engaged following and challenging concepts and understandings of what it means to be racist or discriminate against others. I think it's very important to combat racism and discrimination is to understand the importance of speaking up and using our voice. So often we wait for others to speak up for us. So often we wait for somebody else to be the change that's needed. And we have seen now with COVID-19 and everybody kind of in their homes and kind of social distancing and so self-isolating and just being confined to their one location and not being able to meet in person and advocate in person, we've seen this emergence of taking to social media, taking to digital platforms like Zoom, like Instagram Lives, to create that to amplify those voices and to reach into connecting with other communities and creating allies. I think it's important now more than ever before to do that and not allow current circumstances to dictate otherwise. I'm going to take you back to when I was 7 years old. So when I was 7 years old, I was reading the Montreal Gazette, and I was sitting at our dining table, and I took the newspaper and I ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom. And I said to my parents that one day I want to write for this. And my mom, may she rest in peace, said to me, "No, honey, one day you want to own this." And those words have never left my side. My mom is no longer with me, but her words still resonate to this day. And I worked really hard. I knew I wanted to be a journalist, and I took the classes. I honed my skill. I inhaled books at every opportunity I got. I love to read. I love to learn. I love to storytell. Now, I started CEGEP, and after the first semester, we went home for the holidays, and I made the decision to wear the hijab. And I was the first woman in my family to wear the hijab. In fact, I had to actually fight against my family, who was more secular at the time. And I had to make that decision to wear the hijab. And those around me, so I'm talking about my immediate circle, I had a lot of naysayers. I had a lot of people not happy with my decision to wear the hijab. So one thing I heard a lot of was, well, you say you've always wanted to be a journalist, but there's nobody who looks like you on television. So obviously, if you're choosing to wear the hijab, you're going to kiss those dreams goodbye. And it was a humbling moment. And I remember it very, very clearly. And I looked at those around me who said that, and I said, that's okay, because this is something I believe in, and this is something I want to do for myself, and so be it. So fast forward a few years, I got married, I moved to Toronto, I had my kids, and all the while I was actually freelancing for a local newspaper in Toronto. Nothing big, but it was just something enough to keep me writing regularly. And I moved back to Montreal, and I had this urge. I knew that I wanted to continue writing. I knew that I wasn't ready to abandon my dream because it was such an integral part of who I was as an individual. So what I did is I actually launched a blog, CanadianMomA.com. And I launched it in part, truth be told, because I wasn't sure that somebody who looked like me, meaning a woman who wears a hijab, could ever be on television or could ever work in mainstream media. So I launched my blog. And at the time, it was a sea of white. There was no diversity in the blogosphere. And I stood out like a sore thumb. So I launched my blog. And the number one thing I learned very quickly was you don't write about religion and you don't write about politics. That's two things you just don't do. Huge taboos. And then that brought me to September 10th, 2013, 2012 or 2013. It was when they announced the proposed Charter of Values with then Quebec Premier Pauline Marois. And it's something that hit me to my core, that as a fiercely proud Quebec-born Canadian Muslim woman, it was being questioned, my identity was being questioned. And I heard a radio report that referred to Muslims in Quebec as us versus them. And I was driving and my knuckles were white from gripping onto the steering wheel. And I was so upset. And I came home that night and I poured my heart into a blog post. I wrote a blog post, an open letter to Pauline Marois. And I hit send, I published it, and I went to bed. And when I woke up the next morning, 50,000 people had read my blog post. At the time, that was a huge deal. I had never seen numbers like that before. And so it began. I started getting calls for radio, print, and television. So the first call for television that I ever got was from Breakfast Television, Montreal. It was their second week. And I was asked to be on the show. And at that point, I was the first woman to ever even be on television as a guest, much less to work in the industry. And I went on and I spoke passionately and I articulated myself. And when the camera shut off, the then host turned to me and said, "You're good." I said, "Thank you." And she said, "Like, you're really good. Like, we need to have you back on." And I said, "Thank you. I would be happy to." And I went home. And so I did local, national, international interviews based on that one blog post. I spoke on Al Jazeera International to an audience of 34 million people around the world. I debated with scholars and professors and advocates and everyone in between on television. And over the next 5 years, I continued to weigh in on topics of diversity and of race and of religion, all the taboos I was told to never weigh in on. And what happened, I learned very quickly, is it started to resonate with a lot of people. So people started asking me, and these are not Muslim people. These aren't people who wear the hijab or who look just like me. These are people who are just not white, for lack of a better word, who are just thanking me for using my voice and thanking me for speaking up and thanking me for advocating for rights and issues that matter to them. And so I continued on. I carried on with my blog, with my interviews on Breakfast Television Montreal. I was invited on periodically anytime there was an issue to do with race or discrimination or Muslims. I was invited on, and every time they would say, "Thank you so much for coming. You were amazing." And then one day I said, "I love being here. I'm so happy to be here, but I'm going to let you in on a little secret. There's more to me than my hijab." Meaning, you can have me on the show anytime, and it doesn't actually have to be about a Muslim issue. And they were taken aback a little bit, and they said, "Oh, yeah, of course, absolutely." And so I went home. In 2017, so this is a few weeks after the Quebec City mosque shooting, that gripped our entire nation, that just shook us all. And I immediately started blogging about it and my response to it. I got a call from the Montreal Gazette saying that they had been following my blog and asking me if I would like to have my own column in the Montreal Gazette. And so that was one childhood dream realized. And of course I said, yes, yes, please. I would absolutely love that. And so I started with my column at the Montreal Gazette. Fast forward to 2018, I got another phone call, this time from one of the producers of Breakfast Television Montreal, saying that they're actually launching a news show, City News Montreal, in September of 2018, and they're looking for a video journalist. And might I be interested in it? And at that moment, I just felt so many stars align, and my childhood dream of being on television one day came true. And I said, yes, please. And so we created the segment Diverse City, which is the only segment of its kind in Canada and North America on a mainstream network to feature diversity. And in doing so, I became the first woman in Quebec history to wear the hijab on television. So what happened there was I was invited back on Breakfast Television Montreal to introduce me as part of the new City News team. And as I was about to go on camera, the then host, Derek Fage, who's a lovely human being and a friend of mine, turned to me and said, ready to make history? And the goosebumps that followed, it was just the perfect thing to say at that moment. And so I made history as the first woman in Quebec to wear a hijab on television, and the second in Canada. One thing that I've learned, and I know as clear as day, is that representation matters. Diversity matters. And we're not going to stay quiet about it anymore. We don't need to have other people telling our stories. We need to reclaim the mic and tell our own stories. That is exactly what I've done. But more than that, as I go into cultural communities every week, whether it's cultural diversity, whether it's sexual diversity, whether it's any other form of diversity, and I pass the mic to the members of these communities. And I think that is something very simple and straightforward that we can ask anyone watching this to do, is to pass the proverbial mic. So some people might be watching and be like, okay, great, it's easy for you to do. You're on television. You literally pass the person the mic. What I mean by that is, if you have a following on social media, no matter how big it is, feature individuals from Black, Indigenous, people of color, various communities. Pass them the mic. Let them do takeovers of your social media. Feature their voices, amplify their voices, amplify the content they produce. So one thing that, being a digital marketer and working in PR as well as journalism, one thing I'm acutely aware of is the lack of representation in marketing. So that's, I could talk to you about that a whole other day, but the lack of representation in marketing is actually really, really pervasive, because what happens is when people of color, when Black and Indigenous people are left out of the conversation, are not represented when it comes to marketing, it gives the meta message that our voices don't matter, that we don't matter. And so what happens is people will sooner spend their hard-earned money with a brand that is inclusive. When I say people, I mean people who care about diversity, people who are passionate about inclusivity, will spend their money with brands and organizations that show representation and diversity. And that is something really important. So if you come across an ad, for example, that shows diverse representation, something simple you can do is weigh in. You can comment and say, I love this diversity. You can share it. You can spend your money, put your money where your mouth is. Go and support those businesses, because now more than ever before, we need to stand up and stand united and say that diversity matters. We are proud and unapologetically here. We will stand in our truth and let our actions and our words speak for themselves.